The wind had teeth that night, and it chewed at Castle Black without mercy. Jon Snow felt it first as a change in the timbre of the gale, a deeper, almost mournful howl threading through the ordinary screams of winter. He leaned into the parapet's icy merlons and stared northward across the dead white beyond the wall. Lantern light guttered behind him, making a halo of gold that danced across his black furred cloak. But the vastness ahead swallowed every hint of warmth. There was only snow-packed darkness and the low, rolling thunder of distant drums he could not name. Yet he knew the sound all the same. Winter had always spoken to the Starks in hushed voices, warning of things that walked on frozen feet. Tonight the warning was no whisper but a tolling bell. He turned. Beneath the rampart, the courtyard swarmed with the ordered chaos of men readying for Mance Rayder's Wildling assault. Torches flared along the switchback stair, illuminating leathern helms and beaten breastplates. Brothers of the Night's Watch fastened shields, checked bowstrings, spat dry jokes through chattering teeth. South of the gate, King Stannis's makeshift host rumbled like a hive. Baratheon men in black and yellow surcoats, Sel's words under bright pennants, even the occasional red priest flickering in scarlet beside iron-bound braziers. Castle Black was a collage of desperate allegiances lashed together against a single northern tide. And north of the gate, that tide had begun to shift. Jon descended the stair, boots clanging on iron treads, cloaks snapping behind him. The men parted without spoken order. He wore no sigil, only black, but something in his eyes, perhaps the quiet fear he refused to name, compelled them to clear his path. Dolorous Ed fell in beside him, lank hair crusted with rime. "You smell it?" Ed muttered. Jon tightened the leather strap of his scabbard. "I feel it. That's worse. I was hoping the stink was just the latrines backing up." Ed managed a grimaced smile. "Suppose that's too much to ask." Samwell Tarly waited near the armory door, hugging a rough-hewn crate to his chest. Within lay shards of obsidian, dragonglass arrows Jon had procured from the fist of the first men. Each black sliver shimmered with its own frozen fire, as though forged from night itself. Sam's breath fogged in frantic bursts. "Jon," he squeaked. "The ravens. They're silent," Jon finished. He had already checked the rookery. The birds hunkered mutely on their perches, eyes like beads of onyx. Even Ghost, prowling the yard's edge, paced with ears flattened and lips peeled back over moon-bright teeth. When the old powers stirred, every creature felt the tremor.
Some swallowed.
"What do we do?" Jon rested a hand upon the crate. "You stay with Maester Aemon. Guard these with your life. No matter what comes through that gate, make certain they reach the men who need them." He lifted one pale shard between forefinger and thumb. In torchlight, the glass sang with color. Purples, greens, hidden reds, like the trapped soul of a dragon. "Steel won't serve us tonight." A roar rose from atop the wall, closer now, raw throats bellowing alarm. 3 blasts of the war horn. Not once, not twice. 3. Its face grayed. The dead. The courtyard froze. Men who had survived blade and blizzard alike felt their courage seize as though an unseen hand had wrapped round their hearts. Horses whinnied, rolling white eyes. Torches guttered. One by one, flames winked out, sucked into the deeper dark pressing against the castle. Then the wall moaned. It was an ancient sound, older than language, a groaning protest from the ice itself. Somewhere above, a fissure spider-webbed across aquamarine stone, scattering diamond splinters into the abyss. And in that shattering, Jon heard the crumbling of every oath ever sworn. The wall is falling. He sprinted. Up the stair, past shivering stewards and iron-gripped archers, into the teeth of the rising storm. The higher he climbed, the clearer the catastrophe revealed itself. North of Castle Black, the wall glimmered like a frozen waterfall caught in moonlight. But along its face, a bruise of blackness spread, ice darkening as if a shadow had seeped into its heart. The shadow moved. Shapes assembled at the base. A phalanx of figures pale as death, armored in frost, eyes alight with unnatural sapphire. They marched without cry or drum, yet the earth shuddered beneath their advance. In their center rode a tall, silent rider upon a stallion of rotted flesh and shattered bones made sleek by rime. Blue eyes burned beneath a crown of hoarfrost horns. The Night King. Jon drew a breath so cold it split his lungs. He had dreamed of this moment, visions cast by Melisandre's flames and Bran's broken tales, but dreams could not contain its gravity. Here was the doom of mankind, and it walked with the certainty of sunrise. A horn sounded from the Wildling camp beyond the tunnel. Mance's rally. Fires flared along their makeshift siege lines, silhouettes scrambling. The free folk had come to scale the wall. Now they watched it betray them. The Night King raised one hand. Silence fell, a sepulchral hush that swallowed the wind. The dead halted, a perfect stillness amid whipping snow. For a heartbeat the world seemed to pause, as though the wall itself dared not breathe. Then the king's fingers closed. Cracks shrieked through ice. Entire slabs shivered, shifted, fell. A great boom rolled down the colossal height, echoing like thunder within a cathedral. Jon caught the railing as the platform lurched. Ed shouted, pointing. Along the castle-side curtain wall, sheets of ice peeled away, plummeting into the courtyard in jagged avalanches. Shattered shards skittered across stone like murderous hail. Men below scattered. Some were too slow. White shards the size of ox carts crushed them where they stood. A mule shrieked, hind legs kicking even as icicle blades impaled its flank. Jon fought to keep balance as the whole world tilted. The wall bucked again, an impossible rolling heave. Then a roar of splitting stone erupted overhead. From the topmost rampart, a section of ice the length of a ship's hull broke free and tipped outward, curling in slow, majestic ruin before gravity claimed it. Fell toward Jon. He dove, dragging Ed flat. The slab sheared past, missing the outer stair by scant yards, and exploded upon the courtyard with the fury of a frozen meteor. The blast of air flung men and horses alike. Snow parted in a geyser. When it settled, silence claimed the yard anew. Silence, and the sudden absence of any barrier between living and dead. A ragged shout rose. "They're through!" Jon hauled himself upright. The breach gaped where the wall had once stood, an archway hewn by sorcery and cold. Beyond, the Night King spurred his corpse steed toward the opening. Around him, an army of dead pressed forward, shoulder to shoulder, as unstoppable as the tide. "Archers!" Jon roared. Arrows hissed from the parapet, a black storm streaking toward the breach. Most struck true, thudding into rotten flesh, ricocheting off frozen mail. But the dead did not falter. They advanced with the inevitability of winter itself, clambering over kin that collapsed beneath them, eyes aglow in sockets of wind-burnt bone. Jon seized a bow from a fallen ranger, notched a dragonglass arrow. He drew until sinew trembled. On the wall-top Ed loosed beside him. Sam, pale but determined, struggled to lift his own weapon. Together they loosed. The obsidian head found a wight's chest. Instantly blue flame guttered inside rotten ribs, devouring sinew and cloth, collapsing the creature in a heap of ash. Other arrows met similar marks, sparks of nightfire across the swarm. But there were too few and the dead too many. From the Wildling lines, horns brayed, Tormund Giant's bane, mane of ginger ablaze in torchlight, bellowed curses and orders. His men turned their spears from the castle to the greater menace. Whatever hatreds divided free folk and crows, they paled before annihilation. Yet it was not enough. Below, the Night King reached the breach. He turned his gaze upward to Jon. Time slowed. In that depthless blue, Jon felt the chill of every winter past and every winter yet to come. He felt himself measured, weighed, dismissed, an ember before an ocean. The Night King raised his sword of sharp-edged ice. Jon expected the charge. Instead, the king simply lowered the blade, pointing, like a judge condemning a soul. Behind him, the dead surged, but before them strode a different horror. Twisting forms of ice and darkness that scuttled on spider limbs, shrieking through faceless maws. Shadows made flesh, birthed from the Night King's will. They raced up the fallen ice, toward the stair, toward John. He turned. Fall back. Block the inner yard. Men scrambled. John leapt the last steps to the courtyard as the first Shadow White vaulted the parapet behind him. Steel rang. A Baratheon knight swung, but the creature flowed around the blade, limbs extending like frost on glass, and pierced him with a talon that burned with cold. His scream frosted in mid-air, lips rhymed with horror before sound could finish. John drew Longclaw. Valyrian steel gleamed dull silver, drinking torchlight. He met the monster's lunge, blade cutting through shadow as though it were flesh. The creature shrieked, an unearthly whistle, and fell in two twitching parts that melted into black water on the stones. Another followed, and another. Everywhere, the dead poured through the broken wall. Skeletal horses trampled the yard. Whites hammered at the main keep doors. A white walker stalked the stables, frost blossoming with each step. Men fought in knots, bravery swallowed by sheer numbers. Ghost leapt beside John, crimson eyes blazing, jaws closing on a white's ankle. John hewed downward, head severed, body collapsing in silent surrender. But for every corpse cut down, 3 more pressed in. Sam! John shouted. Across the chaos, Sam fumbled with a torch and a dragonglass dagger. His courage held, but his hands shook. He plunged the dagger into a white's throat. The creature convulsed, blue fire licking from its eyes before it fell. Keep the fire burning, John called, parrying, slashing, retreating. Fire and glass. A horn sounded again, but this time from the south. Through the maelstrom, John glimpsed banners cresting the King's Road switchback. The fiery heart of R'hllor, the crowned stag on black. Stannis' war camp had roused fully. King Stannis, grim and iron-hearted, rode at the head of a wedge of knights, Melisandre's red priests flanking him with torches blazing high. War drums beat a heartbeat cadence. Men shouted the king's name. The column thundered toward Castle Black's inner gate, only to wheel in sudden horror as shambling figures emerged from shadowed corners. Men they had camped beside hours before, now dead and risen. Stannis bared his teeth, spurring forward. His sword, Lightbringer if rumor could be trusted, glowed with a faint ember's heart. He hewed left and right, the blade trailing sparks that ignited rotting flesh. His knights followed, steel rings chiming a funeral dirge for the dead. But the yard was drowning. John fought shoulder to shoulder with Ed now, Longclaw flashing. Around them brothers fell. A Shadow White's talon pierced Ed's thigh. John severed the arm, hoisting his friend clear, but blood darkened the snow beneath. "We cannot hold the yard," John said, voice hoarse. "Fall back to the King's Tower. We bottleneck the stairs." Ed nodded, teeth clenched against pain. Together they dragged Sam and half a dozen battered brothers toward the inner stair. Ghost herded them, growling low. Behind, the Night King entered the courtyard, frost-whitened stone in his wake. Torches sputtered and died as that icy presence claimed the air. John felt eyes on him again. Higher up, the King's Tower loomed, a squat keep of ancient granite where old Bear Jeor Mormont once held court. Its narrow stair could funnel attackers. If they could bar the door, hold long enough for dawn. Dawn. Could dawn even touch this darkness now? A sudden scream tore the night. From the direction of the stables, a monstrous silhouette unfurled. Wings of ragged leather, body stitched of ice, eyes alight with cerulean fire. A dragon, but dead. Viserion, stolen from beyond the wall months past, now shackled to the Night King's will. It launched skyward, snow billowing in its wake. An instant later azure flame erupted from its maw, a torrent of cold fire that turned steel brittle and men to statues of glass. The flame lanced across the yard, sweeping Stannis' ranks. Horses crashed in crystalline explosions. Knights toppled, bodies fracturing into brittle shards. John and his companions reached the tower door. Sam shoved the dragonglass crate inside. Ghost barreled in next. John shoved Ed through, then turned. Across the yard, the Night King watched him, sword raised. And then John felt it. A tug, like unseen chains wrapping his limbs. Frost seeped into his veins, heavier than cold, as if the Night King sought to claim his very marrow. Jon staggered. Longclaw slipped from numb fingers, clattering on stone. Blue eyes blazed, and Jon saw his own reflection in them. Saw himself frozen, weaponless, kneeling before a king of everlasting winter. "Jon!"
Some screamed.
The spell broke. Jon gasped, grabbed Longclaw, hurled himself through the doorway as Sam and Ed slammed the iron-bound door behind him. The bar came down with a boom that shuddered the tower walls. Darkness closed around them. A single torch sputtered. Jon's breath rasped loud in that narrow stairwell. Sam pressed his back to the stone, clutching his crate. Ed slid down the wall, blood streaking his torn breeches. Outside, the roar of undead dragonfire shook the castle. Stone groaned, but the door held for now. Jon looked upon his brothers, upon the flicker of fear mirrored in their eyes, and felt the weight of every life beyond that door. The Night King had breached the wall, and winter at last had come in full. Hours passed, though time dissolved into the steady drum of the dead upon stone. Jon's small knot of survivors fortified every landing. Overturned tables, iron cauldrons braced against arrow slits, a lattice of broken spears. They lit every torch and oil lamp they could scavenge. Fire fought frost in the narrow corridors, shadows warred with ghost light. Above, more brothers sheltered. Below, Stannis' men battered retreat into the tower, forming a second line. Somewhere in the chaos, Melisandre chanted in High Valyrian, her voice a red ribbon amid the ravens' croak of battle. Through arrow slits, Jon glimpsed the courtyard transformed. What had been a fortress was now a mausoleum under frozen starlight. Viserion roared overhead, breath-carving arcs of sapphire flame along the curtain wall. The dead poured endlessly from the breach, yet the Night King himself remained still, silent commander at the yard's heart, as though daring mankind to break upon him. At dawn, if dawn still dared rise, Jon climbed to a narrow balcony high in the tower. The eastern horizon glimmered faintly, but no warmth came with its gray glow. The world was iron and ash. Snow fell in slow, swirling curtains, thickening the hush. Jon pressed his brow to cold stone. Across the yard, atop the outer stair, wights swarmed over the tangled forms of the slain. Yet amid those frozen horrors he saw movement, human, ragged, alive. Tormund. The wildling stumbled, bleeding from a gash along his brow, dragging a heavy axe. Two of his then warriors flanked him, hacking through undead even as their own wounds steamed in the chill. They fought toward the king's tower door. Jon's heart hammered. Alliance forged in desperation was still alliance. He turned to Sam. "Open the lower postern. Let them in."
Sam nodded, darted downward.
Jon faced the field again. Suddenly Viserion swept low, wings churning blizzards, jaws opening. A torrent of blue flame roared across the yard, vaporizing whites, charring stone to glass. Tormund vanished in the glare. When the brightness faded, only scorched snow remained. Jon clenched the parapet until his knuckles bled. Below, the Night King lifted his gaze to the tower. Their eyes met across drifting ice dust. A silent promise passed between predator and prey. The king raised one hand, and the corpses beneath the dragonfire stirred. Tormund's charred remains twitched, lifted, stood. Even death could not grant escape. Jon closed his eyes. He tasted ash and salt. Not like this. Footsteps pounded behind him. Stannis, helm under one arm, face blackened with soot. "Lord Snow," he grated. "The yard is lost. If we do not break south now, we break never." Jon stared at the ruined field. "There's nowhere to run that winter won't follow. Then we ride for the children's magic beneath the wall. The tunnels still lead southward. We seal them behind us. And leave the realm to its fate?" Stannis' blue eyes were fire-hard. "The realm already burns." Jon felt the truth knife his heart. Yet another part of him, Wolf's heart, sworn heart, refused surrender. He thought of Arya's laughter, Sansa's songs, Bran's wonder. He thought of Ned, whispering honor in a world that devoured it. And he thought of the words carved into every heart that wore the black. I am the shield that guards the realms of men. He looked to Stannis. If we flee, the Night King marches through the gorge unopposed. The Southron lords bicker still. They will not stand united. He will reach Winterfell in a moon's turn, King's Landing by spring. Jon shook his head. We hold here. We hold or we die. But we make him bleed fire and ice both. Stannis's jaw flexed. He glanced to Melisandre, who had followed silent as a shadow. Her red eyes gleamed with strange stars. The Lord of Light demands sacrifice, she whispered. Only in flame is night undone. Stannis turned back to Jon. What do you propose? Jon lifted Longclaw. We cut to the heart. The Night King commands from the yard. Kill him and the dead fall. Melisandre's lips curved. Valyrian steel, dragonglass, the light in the darkness. She approached Jon, laid 2 fingers upon the sword's fuller. Ember sparks danced along the rippled metal, as though her touch awakened some buried ember. Go then, Jon Snow, become the prince that was promised. Jon met her gaze, unblinking. Titles do not matter, living does. He descended the stair. Men gathered at his passage. Watch brothers, Baratheon knights, even a handful of wildlings saved through Sam's bravery. They bled, they trembled, but their eyes kindled at his resolve. Perhaps they saw in him the flame that winter could not consume, or perhaps they simply sought a captain amid the ruin. Either way, they followed. A plan, scarcely more than madness, grew in Jon's mind. Sam would lead survivors down the tunnels with the obsidian cache. They would emerge south of the wall and harry the dead from safer ground. Stannis would marshal his remaining knights to strike at Viserion, drawing the dragon's wrath. And Jon, with a spear's head of men, would carve a path to the Night King. To break the storm, he muttered, fastening his helm. Outside, the dead waited, restless in their eternal patience. Snow fell thicker, muffling every sound save the distant shriek of the risen dragon. Amid that corpse-littered courtyard, the Night King stood unmoved, as though the world were nothing but a board and he its solitary player. Jon pushed open the heavy door. Cold slammed him like a mace. He raised Longclaw, heart steady. One last watch, he breathed. Dee stepped into the dawnless night. The snow kept falling, and the story had only just begun. Snow spiraled like drifting embers around Jon Snow's boots as he crossed the courtyard. Each step scorched into memory by the shrieks of dying men and the crunch of brittle bone beneath his heel. The dim lavender glow of false dawn, if dawn could still be counted, glimmered between shreds of storm cloud, lending every shard of frozen rubble a faint, malign sparkle. The breach in the wall yawned behind him as wide as a king's road, a jagged maw still shedding ice dust that swirled upward on invisible winds. Beyond that ruin, the dead continued to spill southward in a silent tide, their footfalls eerily soft, the clatter of broken spears and rust-eaten mail the only chorus accompanying their advance. Jon's cloak had long since stiffened into a crusted shell, every raven-black fold rimmed by hoarfrost. It creaked whenever he raised his arm, and the simple act of breathing felt as though he inhaled shards of glass rather than air. Beside him strode Ser Godry Faring, one of Stannis's household knights. The man's once gleaming helmed visor was dented inward near the brow ridge, and twin blue lines of frost nipped along his beard where stray droplets of sweat had frozen in place. Behind them came a ragged wedge. Ed Tollett limping but unbowed, 6 Baratheon men-at-arms with shields hacked near ruin, 2 wildlings, Spearwife Yuri and the gnarled Ice River clansman called Stonehand, and a pair of red priests whose torches guttered under the ceaseless wind. Each torch cast a teardrop of copper light upon the snow, but it was a weak flame beleaguered by storm. Jon's heart hammered an anxious cadence in his chest, yet outwardly he moved like a man wading into still water. The breach must be crossed. No plan endured unscathed. Viserion's Hellfrost breath had scattered the original strategy like chaff. Now Jon aimed to carve straight toward the Night King with cold pragmatism and the desperate audacity of those who possess no alternatives. From the parapet to his left drifted the distant twang of bowstrings. Somewhere high above, pike-borne masons hauled casks of lamp oil that Stannis' quartermasters had hoarded for siege work. They spilled the slick black substance onto the courtyard below, a sticky midnight gleam shimmering in the torchlight. It pooled in dips between flagstones, glimmering like obsidian runoff. A horn's call, ragged, uncertain, sliced the frigid air. It came not from Jon's own ranks, but from the chaos of the Wildling camp outside the southern gate. In the gloom beyond Castle Black's towers, fires sputtered as Mance raiders remaining free folk rallied around a new, urgent cry. Jon could not decipher its full meaning, but the pitch of the note suggested frantic retreat rather than triumphant charge. If the dead encircled both sides of the ruin now, Castle Black was truly a coffin awaiting its lid. He pressed onward, ghosting past the massive icicle that earlier had sheared from the wall and smashed a wagon of barley. The shattered wheels jutted from beneath the frozen slab like skeletal limbs. One of the red priests paused long enough to scatter fire oil upon the ruined grain and mutter a prayer. The torch's kiss ignited a dull, sullen blaze, the wetwood crackling under a film of ice. This heat seemed a memory rather than a reality. Jon's boots slid upon half-melted grain kernels before finding purchase. A figure lurched from behind a toppled ballista, one of Stannis' Sellswords, judging by the faded lion sigil stitched to his torn jerkin. The man's face was a ghastly thing, lips black with frostbite, eyes vivid blue. Before he could raise his rust-flecked saber, Jon drove Longclaw through his sternum. The Valyrian blade slid free with a hiss of steel and a burst of vapor as the corpse crumpled. Tiny motes of azure fire fizzed into the snowdrift where he fell. Yuri grunted. "That one belonged to me, Crow." Jon did not slow. "Plenty more to share." The spearwife clicked her tongue. She favored a curved bronze blade scavenged from the fist, its edge serrated like a saw. In her offhand, she brandished a torch of pitch-soaked pine she'd stolen from the priests. Every so often she thrust the flame at encroaching shadows, warding them back like wolves with a brand. Her ferocity steadied Jon in ways he did not pause to examine. At the center of the courtyard, the Night King awaited. His tall, spined helm seemed carved from the purest glacier. It refracted the faint dawn light into spears of cerulean brilliance that haloed his profile. He held no shield, for he required none. Instead, a jagged sword rested loose in his grasp, its translucent edge layering itself with rime that sloughed off in white scales whenever he shifted his stance, only to reform instantaneously. Around him, 6 white walkers arrayed themselves in a crescent, their movements choreographed as though they shared a single will. Jon slowed instinctively. 5 paces behind, Ser Godry adjusted his gauntlet grip upon a broadhead axe whose haft had been wrapped in red leather to ward the cold. His lips moved. A prayer? A recitation of a wife's name left far south? The words vanished in the wind. To the right, the Baratheon men fanned, shields locked, forming a crude tortoise. Yuri and Stonehand flowed outward to flank. The priests remained rearward, torches raised high, murmuring recitations in the guttural tongue of Ass-High. Jon raised Longclaw. His breath puffed white around the wolf-head pommel, each exhalation a fleeting ghost. Ed took position behind Jon's left shoulder, despite the blood that soaked through the crude bandage at his thigh. The other brothers of the Watch had either fallen or were now scattered across the ramparts holding choke points. Samwell and Maester Aemon had vanished into the tunnels with a third of their order. Whether they still lived was known only to the gods. No clash of drums announced the beginning. One moment nothing moved. The next, the dead charged. A white fur cloak streaked with frost announced the first wight, some forgotten ranger now warped by cold necromancy. He rushed Ser Godry headlong, two-handing a long axe. The Baratheon knight met him with a diagonal chop that cleaved flesh and bone like dry twigs, but the wight's momentum toppled them both. Yuri impaled another through what had once been a throat, bronze teeth biting until the blade wedged between vertebrae. She braced her boot on its chest and yanked the weapon free in a spray of clotted ice. Jon focused upon the closest White Walker. This one bore a spear of translucent glass, barbed and cruel. Its eyes glowed with a cold so profound it bordered on the absence of all color. They regarded John as a man might appraise a curious insect. The walker slid forward, not rushed, but with predatory inevitability.
Lonklof met spier.
The impact rang like struck crystal. John felt the vibration travel his arms, a shockwave cracking through elbow, shoulder, into spine. He pivoted, letting the spear glance across his mailed sleeve. Snow hissed as its edge scraped blackened ringmail, crusting links with rime. He countered with a slice aimed at the walker's neck. The creature parried effortlessly, sword dripping cold light. A second walker detached from the crescent, circling. John realized at once the trap. They would flank, the first feinting, the second stabbing to finish. Left, he barked. Ed limped to intercept but nearly fell. Gods, he was spent. John shifted weight, reverse slashed. The spear point caught his thigh. Just a kiss, but even that shallow graze numbed muscle beneath armor. The priests chanted louder. With a roar, one hurled his torch at the walker on John's left. Flames struck the creature's fur cloak and clung there, orange licking over blue frost. A scream, softer than human, sharper, a crystal chime, escaped its thin lips. It recoiled, cloak igniting into a dazzling pyrotechnic display that mixed orange and cerulean sparks. John seized the moment. He drove Longclaw low beneath the spear arm of the first walker, punching the Valyrian steel through its stomach, up into frosted rib. The creature stiffened. For a heartbeat, silvery veins spider-webbed across its pale flesh, spreading from the point of penetration like cracks in glass. Then it shattered, exploding into 1,000 glimmering fragments that chimed as they fell, each shard catching dawnlight in tiny prisms. The numbing cold left John's thigh the instant the walker died, as though some spell dissolved with its master. A wight lunged from his blind side, a free-folk youth with plaited hair. John twisted, severing her desiccated wrist, and Ed, bless him, raised a dragon-glass-tipped javelin to plunge into her chest. The corpse crumbled to ash, but the second walker had sloughed the priest's fire now. Embers clung blackening to its cloak, but its spear remained lethal. It glided forward, unhurried. Behind John, something boomed. He risked a glance. Stone Hand had toppled, knees half-gnawed by teeth marks. Behind the fallen clansman, a brawny wight in cracked, then plate clubbed Baratheon shields aside with a rusted warhammer. Godry Faring's men buckled, their tortoise undone. "Hold!" John shouted, yet his voice lacked weight against the wind's shriek. He ducked a spear thrust, shuffled inside its guard. Longclaw rose in two-handed arc. The walker twitched its wrist, altering course with inhuman precision. John's swing bit arm instead of torso, enough to cleave but not kill. Ice dust spumed. The walker hissed, flicking offhand to slam the spear haft across John's gut. Impact drove breath from lungs. The second priest lunged past John. He shoved his torch point first into the walker's eyes. Flames blossomed like a crimson lily. There was that crystalline scream again, so alien it rattled bone. The walker thrashed. The priest pushed deeper, voice rising into a wild litany. The creature's hair burst aflame. Then its skull fissured and collapsed like an eggshell under boot. It, too, burst into fractal shards that tinkled across the snow. John staggered, wheezing. He clapped the priest's shoulder in gratitude, but no answer came. The red priest stared blankly, a spear of ice protruding through his belly at an angle John could not imagine surviving. The priest's mouth stretched soundlessly. Within, blood froze mid-breath, glistening sugar red. The man toppled sideways and lay motionless, torch extinguished against his own crimson snow. It cursed. Despite agony in his leg, he kicked the corpse's torch back alight, thrust it forward like a pike. Wights recoiled from flames even when steel no longer deterred them. A horn blast, 2 notes, rolled off the wall's heights. John's head jerked upward. To his horror, a second avalanche of ice plates peeled off 50 yards west of the first breach. The Night King, inscrutable mask of frost, shifted a single step, extending his palm as though guiding the wall's slow ruin like a conductor controlling an orchestra. The rampart above vomited fragments. A siege tower of laced pine, constructed by Stannis' sappers, splintered beneath falling ice. Flames erupted. Oil casks burst. Green tongues of wildfire, once meant as secret weapon, bled across snow in writhing serpents. For an instant, the courtyard shone emerald. Wights unlucky enough to wander into that path erupted in green conflagration, their shrieks lost beneath the roar. But soon the wildfire pooled and settled, and the bitter wind extinguished all but stubborn patches that ate into stone. It dawned on Jon that each new collapse of the wall created not random chaos, but a widening funnel channeling undead toward central Castle Black. The Night King meant to crush every defender under sheer numbers before dawn advanced. Valyrian blades and dragonglass shards were precious, but limited. Fire demanded fuel that they were fast exhausting. They might hack and burn and shatter until arms gave out, and still the dead would come. Longclaw's weight felt enormous in Jon's hand. He pivoted on instinct as a gutted stable mare, hide stretched taut over icy ribs, barreled toward him. Its rider, no more than a skeletal silhouette, wielded a corroded lance. Jon ducked low, slashed upward, blade severing skeletal femur. Horse and rider collapsed in a heap of splintered bone. Jon stepped aside at the last instant, though not before a jagged rib tore through his cloak. Wind found the rip and lashed him with renewed cold. He scanned for Godry. The knight knelt, axe buried in the skull of a brute wight. Blood trickled from inside his damaged helm. He rose, staggering, but waved Jon off. Yiri, meanwhile, fought like some vengeful spirit, her braid whipping arcs of frost as she whirled, torch and bronze blade in alternating rhythm. Stonehand had regained his feet, crude bone club in one fist, the other a blackened stump. He was living up to the name in grim finality, though he would not last long at that pace. Jon's eye returned again to the Night King. Here lay destiny, stark and terrible. Yet to reach him one must cross a killing field that filled faster than it emptied. Jon's wedge had advanced no more than 15 yards since engagement began, and already half of it lay dead. He inhaled. Each breath froze peach-fuzz crystals around his nostrils. Vision tunneled. Somewhere behind, Ed's voice cursed the gods. A thunderclap shook the air. Viserion, swooping overhead, jaws unhinging in silent roar. Azure fire lanced toward the western watchtower. Stone spalled outward in molten plumes. The tower sagged like a drunk. Jon grit his teeth until they ached. If the dragon remained unchallenged, none of this mattered. Even should he slay the Night King, Viserion's wild wrath would reduce Castle Black to slag. A dragon made puppet by ice sorcery might not die with its master. Or perhaps it would, he could not be sure. And he lacked the means to fell the beast. But Stannis might. Jon allowed himself a swift glance south across the inner yard. Past the second ring of walls, he glimpsed a battered array of King's men scrambling with ballistae, each tipped with a barrel of wildfire drawn from dwindling supplies. Lightbringer's faint glow marked Stannis himself, astride a coal-black destrier. Men repositioned artillery, calling orders that vanished in wind. Their shadows flickered enormous against inner battlements. Jon inhaled snow knives once more, then bellowed, though he doubted Stannis could hear, "Loose on my call!" His voice cracked. Not even the nearest priest turned. No matter, he would signal another way. Stonehand roared as a second wight clubbed him from behind, driving bone spikes into his back. The clansman swung wide, smashing the creature's head to powder. But momentum carried Stonehand forward onto one knee. Blood steamed off his heavy furs. Yiri interposed herself, torch fending off fresh attackers. Ed drew his last dragonglass dagger. Jon stepped. The world contracted to a series of micro-decisions. Feint, parry, pivot, slice. He fought not with flourish but with ruthless economy, every motion conserving strength for the final sprint. Edge bit neck, point punched eye socket, pommel struck temple. Bones cracked, snow hissed as corpses collapsed. An opening yawned, narrow, fleeting. Jon plunged toward it. His wedge reformed like carrion crows in his wake. Together they advanced 5 paces, then stalled amidst a clutch of the dead risen in fresh waves. A white walker, taller than most, helm crowned by razor fins, glided into view, intercepting. He carried a poleaxe of shining diamond, too heavy for mortal man yet wielded with dancer's grace. The walker spied the torch in Yuri's hand and swept his weapon in a lateral arc. The bronze-bladed spearwife tried to duck, but the poleaxe's hook snagged her torch hand at the wrist. Flame flickered out as the wood snapped. The beacon vanished into snow. In the same motion, the walker reversed, driving the axe's pick down for Yuri's skull. She twisted, but not far enough. "Yuri!" John shouted. He leapt, interposing Longclaw. Steel rang a death shiver as it caught the descending pick. Yuri rolled clear, blood spattering across white drifts. Her forearm hung useless, bone exposed where the walker's first sweep had torn. John and the walker locked eyes. The creature's pupils, or what passed for them, were mere pinpricks of ice burn, ringed by a starburst of azure cracks radiating across translucent scara. John felt something probe his thoughts, cold, ancient, indifferent to pain or hope. He shuddered but pressed attack. They exchanged a flurry of blows, steel against crystal, sparks of hoarfrost trailing each impact. John fought without conscious thought, every muscle remembering Rob's lessons in the courtyard, Roderick Castle's wooden sword drills, Corrin's brutal tutelage among the white wilderness. The walker moved with a predator's poise, yet its pattern soon revealed a subtle rigidity. It lacked improvisation, trusting in overwhelming strength. John exploited minor asymmetries. A thrust feinted low, baiting a parry. An overhead cut flowing into swift riposte aimed at the unguarded knee. Valyrian edge grazed thigh. White frost dust spurted. The walker hissed, an echoing screech that might have shattered glass if any remained unbroken. John pivoted inside its guard, slashed upward. Poleaxe haft blunted the stroke. Their faces came near. John saw his own reflection. Pale, lips cracked, eyes rimmed red. The walker's free hand darted toward John's throat. John jammed his forearm beneath the clawed fingers. For a heartbeat they grappled, the cold seeping into John's flesh faster than a plunge into an iced lake. His veins felt like iron rods. Yuri, somehow standing despite blood loss, lunged. With her good hand, she plunged her serrated bronze into the walker's back, teeth of the blade punching between glass-like plates. Bronze was no match for ancient ice, yet the distraction sufficed. John roared, wrenched free of the walker's grip, reversed Longclaw, and rammed it through the creature's breast. A sound like frost-splitting rock reverberated. The walker exploded outward in shards. Yuri tumbled from backlash. John staggered as ice dust storms whirled about him. The poleaxe clattered to the snow, but no longer crystal. It had become mundane iron, as lifeless as a rust nail. John realized with sudden clarity. Kill the master, and his conjured weapons lost enchantment. That knowledge hummed electric in his skull. But there were too many masters. For walkers, maybe 5, remained at the Night King's flank. Each commanded scores of whites. To reach their liege, they would need to cut through those officers first. A sharper roar split sky. Viserion banked low, preparing another pass. John looked to Stannis' artillery line. Men wrestled a green-tipped quarrel onto the ballista ramp. Others hefted crossbows thick as saplings. But the dragon would breathe before they shot unless something diverted its aim. "Ed!" John shouted above the din. His friend lurched, eyes glazed. "Signal Stannis." "Fire the oil." Ed blinked. He still gripped the fallen priest's torch. Understanding dawned behind his exhaustion. He limped to a low parapet chunk, once part of the training yard's west wall, and thrust the flame high, waving in a slow arc toward the king's men. Orange cinders carried by wind danced like autumn leaves. Whether by luck or divine grace, someone on the inner wall spotted the signal. A brazen horn answered 3 sharp notes. Teams shoved at winches. Heavy ropes groaned. Viserion's shadow eclipsed the courtyard. Blue fire churned in his maw. Ballista strings twanged. A quarrel the size of a tree trunk hurled skyward trailin'. A comet tail of wildfire-soaked flax. Halfway through its arc the pitch caught. The quarrel ignited blaze green, brighter than any torch. It struck Vizirion's left wing joint. Flame erupted. No ordinary dragonfire could harm the dead thing, but wildfire obeyed no natural law. Green tongues burrowed into sinew and scale, gnawing with chemical fury. The dragon shrieked a sound like glaciers splitting. Wings faltered mid-beat. Flight turned into uncontrolled spiral. Vizirion crashed into the wall's mid-tier with a seismic boom, dislodging more ancient ice. Plumes of shattered crystal geysered outward. Jon risked a grin that felt alien on his frozen lips. But the victory was partial. Wildfire burned hot but brief. Already green flames sputtered as unnatural cold fought to smother them. Vizirion thrashed, shaking slush free, readying to return skyward. They had seconds only. Ser Godry barked, "Lord Snow, the king directs us to press." Indeed, Stannis, sword aflame, pointed viciously toward the Night King as though to stab him with distance alone. Knights rallied round, felling wights in gleaming arcs of steel and panic. Jon nodded once. They charged. Distance collapsed to a maelstrom of limbs and ice. Ed's torch carved a curving bubble of heat. Yiri limped beside Jon, her useless arms strapped to torso with a leather belt torn from a fallen Sellsword. Stonehand thundered like a wounded aurochs, club flailing. The Baratheon shield wall punched a wedge, leaving jagged corridors of death where the priest's last torches lobbed into clusters of undead. Frostbound corpses ignited into wailing effigies. The Night King watched their approach without expression. Blue luminance pulsed faintly at his temples, as though veins of light powered machinery beneath his flesh. He raised his sword, but not to fight. Instead, he traced a sigil in the air, intersections of glowing runes. Tiny fissures spidered across the snowpack everywhere his gaze fell. From each crack, tendrils of pale mist seeped upward, knitting together into airy wraiths. They assumed vague man-shape, arms elongated, fingers like icicles. Dozens formed a living barricade around their monarch. Yiri spat blood. Jon's group smashed into that barrier. Longclaw bit Mistwraith, and to Jon's relief, Valyrian steel made contact. Mist condensed into granular ice at the blade's touch, shattering whatever portion he struck. But the wraiths recoalesced just as fast, swirling into new shapes. Strike, fragment, reform. Strike, fragment, reform. Each engagement sapped precious seconds and strength. Behind Jon, Godry's axe hissed through a wraith's waist, momentarily clearing gap enough for 3 men-at-arms to rush forward. One stumbled, buried chin-deep in snow as a wight hamstrung him from below. Another fell to talons ripping through visor slits. The third, a youth scarcely bearded, cried wordless defiance and kept advancing, only for the Night King himself to extend one finger. A spear of ice erupted from beneath the youth's feet, skewering him mid-stride. His scream ended before it began. Jon's mind raced. Dragonglass might disrupt these mistwraiths faster than steel. He still carried a handful of arrowheads lashed into a leather wrap at his belt. But to draw them meant sheathing Longclaw, a risk he could not abide with walkers so near. Stonehand, Jon barked, voice ragged. The clansmen turned. Jon tossed the leather pouch. Shatter them. Stonehand caught the bundle in his remaining good hand, ripped it open with teeth, then hurled obsidian shards by the fistful into the mist-wraith ranks. Where shards struck, wraiths evaporated in whirls of steam. Space opened, fleeting but real. Jon surged ahead, Longclaw taking 2 walker blows on flat and edge before cleaving into one's clavicle. The creature tried to withdraw, but the blade bit deeper, splitting it clean. Yet even as it collapsed, another walker stepped into place. They were inexhaustible. A blistering surge of cold slapped Jon's face. He glimpsed the Night King's sword sweeping horizontally. Perhaps 30 feet separated them, but the gesture birthed a slicing wind that cut through wooden shields and flesh with equal disdain. Baratheon men crumpled, torsos flensed open as though by invisible scythes. Yiri shrieked when the wind glanced her thigh. Blood flashed across drifting snowflakes, crimson motes turning pink as they froze. She fell, dragging herself aside to avoid trampling feet. John muscled forward, each heartbeat a war drum. Ed, stoic and doomed, limped after him, fending at his flank. Godry rammed his shoulder against a wraith, scattering it, then buried his axe into yet another walker's shin. But the walkers refused to topple like ordinary foes. They fought even with legs half-severed, torsos cracked, propelled by an elemental hatred that transcended flesh. A second ballista quarrel screamed through air overhead, but this one missed Viserion entirely, burying itself in the wall above the dragon's recovering form. The wildfire within sputtered but did not ignite. Stannis' artillery crew hurried to wind the next, though their supply of green glass pots looked perilously thin. Viserion roared, blue fire backlit by spasms of green still clinging to wing membranes. It launched again, a low glide aimed not at battlements this time but at the press of Jon's assault group, as though sensing where its master's attention had honed. Jon saw the glow intensify at the dragon's throat. Cold flame threatened to sweep them from existence in heartbeats. There was no cover except fallen bodies and mounds of ice. He barked orders. Men dove to either side, hurling themselves beneath macabre shelter. Jon mirrored them, rolling behind the carcass of an armored dire goat brought south by wildlings months before. The azure inferno passed overhead, flattening snow into a glassy sheet that hissed and cracked. An instant later, bone-deep cold flooded the area, seeping through leathers. Any exposed skin burned with chill. Jon forced himself upright. Breath burst in ragged clouds. Viserion wheeled away, ice eddy swirling in its wake. The Night King had not moved during the dragon's strafing run. He trusted utterly in his mount's aim. His face remained inscrutable, yet Jon imagined he sensed faint triumph within that stillness. Stannis' voice rose, faint but carrying, "Aim true! One more!" Jon could not look away, but through peripheral vision he perceived the final ballista coral slotted. He also saw the wildfire cask's glass spiderwebbed with earlier shrapnel. Any mislaunch might break it upon the ramp and immolate the crew. Nevertheless, the king commanded. The line drew taut. The Night King stepped forward. He lifted his sword, its edge pulsing with inner blue radiance. Every wight and wraith in his immediate orbit slowed, freezing mid-motion, as though he siphoned their stolen life to feed some greater cast of magic. The very air thickened. An unnatural hush swallowed the battlefield. Even Viserion banked into a steady hover, wings undulating but soundless. Then the Night King stabbed his blade into the ground. From that point spidered a web of ice veins, lines of crystalline growth that raced outward faster than a galloping horse. Where the veins touched stone, they spread upward in lacy frost. Where they touched corpses, they pulsed, and the corpses rose renewed, stringy sinew knitting. Where they touched the living, flesh grayed instant. Men screamed as frigid tumors blossomed across limbs, converting muscle to brittle crystal. Ser Godry was one. His left leg became a pillar of ice from knee to boot before he could blink. The limb shattered under the weight of his armor. He pitched sideways, howling. Yiri shrieked anew, trying to crawl, but webs of frost crisscrossed her wounded leg, anchoring her to soil. Stonehand's stump grew a branch of sparkling fingers that spiraled across his forearm. Jon felt the wave approach through ground tremor. It would reach him in heartbeats. He had no gift of fire left, nor dragonglass barrier to counter such sorcery. Instinct roared, move or die. He sprinted, ignoring every screaming muscle. Ice cracked in his wake as frost chased his heels. He bounded over a row of corpses. The frost caught the last, raising it as he landed. He leapt onto a mound of splintered cart, snow-jammed spokes still upright. The ice wave hit cartwood and slowed a breath, devouring it from the base up. Atop that collapsing perch, Jon gathered all the anger, terror, and love left him. He hurled Longclaw like a lance. The sword spun end over end, a glittering pinwheel of dusk and dawn, and struck the Night King's shoulder. Steel bit. For the first time that night, the Night King reacted. Not pain. There was no cry, but a fractional tilt of the head, a narrowing of glacial eyes. Longclaw stuck fast, buried to guard. Blue fractures raced across the king's cuirass from the wound site, yet rather than shattering, they sealed almost as quickly, closing around the blade like a wound scabbing. With a lazy movement, he clamped a hand upon the wolf pommel and drew the sword free. He regarded its rippled metal as a scholar might inspect an artifact, turning it to catch what little dawnlight remained. Jon landed in crunchy snow. The ice wave licked at his boots, but its advance had slowed by the Night King's distraction. Still, cold stabbed his soles as though nails of winter hammered upward. Ed stumbled nearby, alive solely because he had been astride beyond the frost's reach. He looked at Jon, expression-stricken. Jon's mind spun with impossible calculus. If Valyrian steel could wound but not kill, then perhaps only Dragonfire or some deeper magic could end this. But Dragonfire belonged to their enemy now. Unless Stannis's last ballista fired, the quarrel arced broad. Not true. Wind shear twisted its nose. Yet fate lent aim. Viserion, hovering to unleash another frost breath, pivoted into its path. The missile clipped the dragon's neck crest, fracturing glass scales. The wildfire cask, still intact, ruptured in explosion of Viridian hellfire. Viserion shrieked, spiraled earthward once more, trailing chunks of burning scale. It crashed mere yards behind the Night King, showering him with emerald embers. This time, the blue flame of the dragon friend wavered. Viserion convulsed, neck arching as wildfire gnawed his throat. Fragments of undead muscle sloughed off. Jon glimpsed vertebrae glowing white-hot beneath decaying flesh. And in that instant, the mist wraiths faltered. They lost cohesion, swirling back into shapeless haze. Walkers paused, blue eyes flickering. The Night King himself straightened, focusing full attention on his wounded mount. His posture betrayed no emotion, yet his sword, long claw still gripped, lowered a fraction. Cracks of green fire danced along his hip where a stray ember grazed. They hissed against his stride, yet did not seem to injure. Still, his absolute poise had been nicked, and that sliver of imbalance was as valuable as any blade. Jon felt the frost recede from his boots. Momentary reprieve, nothing more, but moment enough. He dashed sideways, snatching a fallen shield of blackened oak. On its rim he spied Samwell's handwriting, chalk marks denoting which brothers had cleaned latrines last. The half-erased scrawl drew sudden warmth to Jon's chest. He slung the shield onto his left arm. Ed limped alongside, clinging to a snapped spear haft. Blood matted his beard into icicles, but his eyes burned with that same last ember that refused surrender. Together they plunged into the narrowing space between Palace of Ice and Hellfire Dragon, chasing the only destiny left to them. Jon's heart hammered names: Sansa, Arya, Bran, Rickon, Winterfell, each syllable a footstep. 3 wights rose from snow in their path. Jon rammed the shield edge into the first, reversing momentum to lop its head. Ed swept the haft low, tripping the next before driving his dragonglass point through spine. The third reached, fingers torn and bleeding black ichor. Jon stabbed through its open mouth. Brain and tongue liquefied into mist. They pressed on. Viserion rolled, trying to rise though wildfire still devoured muscle. Blue fire coughed from a throat half-ruined. The gout sprayed to one side in a ragged arc that singed wights as easily as humans. Some undead collapsed, brittle, as the freezing flame overcooked them. Others marched on, uncaring, limbs blackened. Jon arrived before the Night King, now scarcely 10 feet away. Between them lay a field of shattered ice and smoldering cinders. Longclaw still rested in the monarch's fist. The king's gaze speared into Jon with such intensity he thought his soul might freeze. Yet beneath the chill, Jon sensed curiosity, an ancient predator studying prey that had refused to die. A low vibration shook the air. Whether dragons roar or something deeper, he could not tell. "You took my blade," Jon said, more to ground himself than to converse. The Night King tilted his head as though parsing language through eons of disuse. He lifted Longclaw, turning it so the wolf-head hilt faced Jon, a silent invitation or mockery. Jon launched. He hurled the shield, spinning it edge-on toward the king's face. At that same instant Ed flung his spear shaft high, drawing attention upward. The Night King raised Longclaw in lazy deflection, knocking the shield aside. Simultaneously he gestured with free hand, shattering the wooden shaft into splinters mid-flight. But those actions cost him a heartbeat. John dove low, scooping a handful of wildfire-soaked embers spilled from Vizirion's wound. They hissed green even absent flame. He slammed that glowing muck against Longclaw's exposed blade as the king brought it back down. Steel met embers, Dragonfire's bastard cousin, and the metal ignited along ripples. The Valyrian runes flared sickly emerald. The Night King's eyes widened a fraction. He tried to wrench the sword free of Jon's grip, but wildfire left sticky residue that burned hotter upon agitation. Green tongues crawled up the monarch's wrist, racing crystalline arteries. Jon seized Longclaw's grip, twisting with all a stark, stubborn fury. The king counter-twisted, strength titanic. But fire, real fire, made the ancient frost crack. Blue fissures intersected green licks. Steam howled from the Night King's pores. He jerked to throw Jon off. Jon held, feeling palms blister even through gloves. Agony blinded him. He bit his cheek, tasting copper ice. Ed, seeing chance, fetched a broken antler from the ground, part of some stag banner once proud. He rammed it into the seam between Night King's cuirass plates. The crude spike sank an inch, insufficient to kill but enough to disrupt balance. The king lashed out. His backhand smashed Ed across the jaw. Jon heard bones snap. His friend flew backward, limp. In that heartbeat Jon twisted again, driving the burning Longclaw through fissured armor into whatever served the Night King as heart. Wildfire flared, oxygen-feeding fury. Emerald glare erupted from within the monarch's chest cavity. For a breathless eternity nothing happened. Then blue light in those ancient eyes guttered. A bass note like glaciers exploding filled the courtyard. The Night King shattered, starting from the heart outward. Body segments fell away in filigreed frost patterns, flakes so fine they resembled snow, snow that glowed blue-green. Within 2 heartbeats nothing remained but whirling dust catching pale dawn. Silence devoured the world. All at once the whites collapsed, marionettes with strings cut. Mist wraiths dissipated into harmless fog. White walkers froze in place, bodies calcifying into brittle statues before disintegrating. Vizirion let out one last roar, half keen, half groan. Blue flame sputtered from jaws. Then fire ceased. The dragon's undead muscles slackened. Wings folded awkwardly. With seismic sigh it sank, eyes extinguishing like dying stars. Jon stood, knuckles white upon Longclaw's hilt protruding from the snow drift where it had fallen with the king's dust. Green flame still licked along fuller but already dimming. He yanked the sword free and plunged it into nearby slush, extinguishing residue. Steam hissed. Wind returned, the ordinary north wind, hungry but no longer malevolent. Gray light crept over horizon's lip. Somewhere a raven cawed, uncertain. Jon's legs buckled. He fell to knees, chest heaving. At first he thought the roaring in his ears belonged to the fading battlefield, but it came from within, blood rushing too fast, heartbeat too loud. He peeled off left glove. The palm was scorched raw, flesh blistered. Pain existed, and therefore he lived. Footsteps crunched. Ser Godry crawled into view, dragging himself by elbows. His leg remained a stump of ice, and face ashen. Yet he grinned through clenched teeth. "The king," weapons clattered as he gestured broadly, "is done." Jon nodded. "It seems." He forced himself up. He looked for Ed. His friend lay twisted near the corpse of a wight. Jon staggered, boots leaving dark prints. He knelt, rolled Ed gently. Blood-matted hair, but breath fogged faintly. Jaw hung at odd angle. Yet Ed's eyes fluttered open. A miracle of sorts. "Did we win?" Ed slurred. "For the moment," Jon whispered. Snowflakes drifted soft, mundane once more. Pale dawn finally fought free of clouds, painting wall fragments pink. Some distance away, Stannis Baratheon unhelmed, staring dumbstruck at ruin and sunrise. Priests knelt amid still corpses, giving prayer to whichever god would claim credit. Crows circled overhead, though whether feathered or black-clad men, John could not tell in blur of tears. He found Yuri pinned by frost to the ground. Between breaths she grinned, gap-toothed. "Tell your crows it took a spear wife to save their lord commander," she rasped. He clasped her good hand, and warmth passed between scarred palms despite cold. "Get the sawbones to me, Snow," Ser Godry croaked. "I'll not have bled this long just to freeze to death after courage deserts me." John rose, feeling every cut and bruise. He inserted Longclaw back into scabbard. The blade smoked faintly, as though cooling after a forge. He looked at the breach in the wall, now silent and strangely beautiful, jagged edges glittering like diamonds under newborn sun. Beyond lay a white wilderness littered with bodies no longer moving. Winter's threat still loomed. Countless more dead marched somewhere far north. But for today, Castle Black still stood. John exhaled. Each plume dissipated gently rather than crystallizing mid-air. The shield that guards the realms of men had weathered its darkest night, and lived. Yet his watch was far from ended. Snow whispered through the breach all morning, piling in quiet dunes that softened the angles of shattered ice and quenched the last hiss of wildfire. Jon Snow trudged along its rim while dawn's weak color seeped across the sky, searching for signs that the undead tide might yet return. His boots left blood-brown prints on the glazed crust. Every few steps he found another body half-buried, frozen into caricature of life, and forced himself to look, to remember the face. Memory was the last duty owed to the fallen. He found Ser Godry Faring propped against a toppled beam from the gatehouse, leg gone from mid-thigh down. A crude tourniquet of boiled leather cinched so tight the flesh above it had turned the wan blue of autumn plums. 3 black brothers, Cheap Ben, Jarman Buckwell, and Henley Marsh worked silently beside him, sawing a proper peg from green pine. Godry's beard had iced over again. When he saw John, he grinned as though nothing more exciting than Sir Knuckles had happened. "Lord Snow," he rasped, voice rattling in his chest as though each word dislodged gravel. "Tell his grace the dragon took me leg, not the wildlings, so he can't charge them for it." John knelt, laying gloved fingers to the stump's edge. The cold had numbed pain so thoroughly Godry appeared half-drunk. Still, the makeshift plug needed binding with hot pitch if the knight hoped to keep the rest of what remained. John gestured at Cheap Ben. "Get him to the steward's hall, top level. They have a brazier burning now." When the brothers hoisted Godry, the knight caught John's arm. "Stone might stop the dead once, but only men hold it after." He squeezed hard enough John winced. "Hold. I will." John's voice cracked against the wind's knife. They bore Godry away, leaving John alone with the dead. He glanced toward the yard. Snow-capped piles of bodies formed grotesque cairns around the king's tower. Some had already been dragged to pyres assembled nearer the practice yard. Smoke crawled off them in gray ribbons, heavy with the stink of burning hair and leather. Dragonglass arrows and obsidian shards glittered like onyx snowflakes where battle had raged hottest. Every brother who bent to collect them risked frostbite, yet they gathered each shard with reverence. No one trusted the knight enough to leave a single sliver lost. A horn sounded once atop the east rampart. Alive, not alarm. John turned, scanning the wall's broken flank. Brothers hauled new rope lines across the void, straining like ants on white porcelain. Others wedged pine beams into fractured joins, trying to slow further collapse. Maester Harmune, Eamon's lanky apprentice sent north by the citadel months back, stood beside them brandishing a tattered scroll of architecture notes none could decipher. But the men tried anyway, hope found in motion. Below the wall's Shadowmance raiders wildlings huddled in makeshift camps, wary eyes always on Castle Black. Night's Watch rangers patrolled a corridor between. Neither side had strength enough for another fight, yet habit kept swords loose at hips. John sighed. If peace was to survive, he would have to hold it together by will alone. Footsteps behind. Melisandre gliding over crusted snow, scarlet robes bright against endless white. Her shadow trailed long and thin, yet even under sun she seemed birthed of night. She paused beside a corpse where frost had flensed skin from cheek. The mouth hung open in soundless scream. She touched the brow gently, whispering a Valyrian prayer. Frost spidered away from the body's eyes like tears, then softened into steam that drifted upward and vanished. When she straightened, the corpse lay peaceful, lips sealed, frost flowers blooming across chest as if the dead man dreamed of spring. Jon watched wary. You walk freely where some still see sorcery. Let them see. Her voice was the hush of coals beneath ash. When the dark closes again, they will beg sorcery to stand a while longer. It closed last night. He gestured toward the breached wall. Had wildfire not saved us, we'd all be corpses themselves. Wildfire burned because Lawler willed flame into the green. She studied Jon's bandaged palm where smudges of soot still clung. You were his instrument. I was a man with no better idea. She smiled, distant. Do you deny the song sung in your veins, Jon Snow? Jon scowled at the phrase. I deny nothing, but there are dead to burn and living to feed. Songs can wait. Melisandre breathed deep, as though savoring the scent of his stubbornness. Only for a day, she acquiesced. Her gaze traveled to the pyres. See, they burn before nightfall. Ghosts linger when corpses cool but do not char. She drifted away, robes whispering. He watched her vanish into the maze of tents Stannis' healers had raised, and wondered whom she comforted and whom she condemned by those soft prayers. A snowball struck his shoulder. Ghost trotted up, fur matted with meltwater, a stray rib in his jaws. He dropped the bone at Jon's feet like an offering, then shook vigorously, spraying fine crystalline motes. Jon knelt, scritching ears. He is gone, he murmured. Ghost's red eyes locked on his, understanding deeper than speech. Jon's heart twisted. If the Night King could be undone, what of the greater army rumored in the lands of always winter? One victory could not answer that unsung question. He rose and strode for the king's tower. Inside, torchlight melted blue glare into amber gloom. The stairwell stank of sweat and singed cloth. Men dozed against stone, plates still strapped, cheeks streaked with soot. A pair of stewards tipped buckets of icy water into stairs' corners and scrubbed dried blood so no one slipped on gore. Ed Tollett lay on a trestle table near the first landing while Maester Aemon stitched a cut along his scalp. Ed's face was gray save for bright bruises blooming wherever bone had met floor, but he was alive. He winked when he noticed Jon, though the motion tugged the stitch and earned a scolding tch from Aemon. Jon passed higher, to the chamber where Stannis Baratheon conferred with his captains. The door hung ajar. Muttered voices escaped. 300 horse sound enough to ride this morning, Ser Richard Horp declared, frustration sharpening the consonants. But supplies are ash. We can't feed men for a march south, let alone siege Eastwatch. Stannis' reply came clipped. Then we forage. Wildlings claim mammoth herds less than 3 days north. We ride, we slaughter, we salt the meat. The wall needs food more than pride. A rumble of discontent. Knights unpopular with hunting north of the breach. Melisandre's earlier warning echoed in Jon's mind. He stepped through the door before dispute soured further. The chamber had belonged to Jeor Mormont. A massive weirwood inlaid table dominated its center. Its surface, once orderly maps, was now layered with blood-spattered parchments, broken quills, even splinters of arrow shaft pinned with melted wax. Stannis stood over them like a lighthouse above storm. Grease from a guttering sconce painted his cheeks gaunt. He glanced at Jon, eyes flaring briefly. Lord Commander, he greeted, though Jon had never accepted the title. You heard. Enough. Jon stepped nearer. Your Grace, the breach remains unsealed. If we thin the wall to chase mammoth, the dead will stream through again. Horp bristled. The dead lie quiet now. We slew their king. His lieutenants. Jon's memory flashed the last shattering. There are worse in the true north. The Night King was but one. I dream of another. Tall as towers, antlers of ice, a mouth that howls blizzards. He flushed under Stannis' scrutiny, uncertain whether confessing nightmares served any purpose. Dream or not, we are not safe. We must fortify before riding anywhere. Stannis considered a beat. You propose we starve while you quarry more ice? Castle Black cellars hold grain enough for a fortnight if we ration. Enough for your crows, perhaps, Ser Godry Hill interrupted, one of Stannis' bastard nephews. Not for a king's host. Jon measured him. A fortnight buys time to send ravens. White Harbor has ships, Eastwatch still stands. We can ferry provisions north faster than foraging in the Frostfangs. Horp spat. Manderleys feed fat lords in feasting halls. They'll not strip larders for Stannis. Jon leveled a gaze. They will for the realm. Roose Bolton holds Winterfell and calls himself Warden of the North only because Manderley's backing stays uncertain. Prove you guard the North and White Harbor follows. Stannis' mouth slanted. A grim approval. A bold assessment. We send a raven at sunrise. Ser Horp, draft terms. Levy of grain and salted pork equal to 600 barrels. Exemptions on harbor taxes after the war. Walton, ensure the maester's seal. The captains murmured agreement more from habit than enthusiasm. Jon pressed. Work gangs must begin rebuilding before midday. Stannis' stare impaled him. You will command? I will work, Jon corrected. And so will every man fit to lift a stone. Melisandre appeared at the threshold, as though summoned by fiery breath. Lord Snow speaks true. The hourglass has turned, but sand yet runs. Stannis snapped. Then let us spend grains on axes, not tongues. He dismissed his captains and signaled Jon to stay. When the chamber cleared, he fixed him again with that piercing blue. You slew a king last night, he said flatly. Jon braced for mistrust but found none. Instead, Stannis reached inside his cloak and produced a ring of smoky quartz, etched with the stag crowned by flame. He laid it on the map's edge. A gift my brother Renly never wore, he said. Fire in stone, forged at Dragonstone before we sailed. I kept it until one worthy of its weight appeared. Jon stared. I am no prince, no lord. Not yet, Stannis answered. The North starves under Bolton flayed banners and Lannister coin. You are Stark blood, no matter what schemers mutter of bastardy. Take the ring. Mark, you still serve the watch. But when this war ends, I will need a lord of Winterfell sworn to my crown, not to a Tyrell rose or a gilded lion.
Jon sku twisted.
Duty warred with longing so raw it burned. He imagined gray stone halls bright with distant memory of childhood laughter, words of his father. A Stark must always have a place at Winterfell. He closed fingers round the ring, feeling weight not just of quartz but 1,000 oaths. My watch is not ended, he said softly. It will end, Stannis answered. War's end, winter's end, even king's end. Prepare for the morning after. Jon could not reply. He bowed stiff-shouldered and left the chamber. Ghost joined him on the tower stair, hackles rising at some unseen scent. Jon rubbed the direwolf's neck. I do not want crowns, he whispered. Ghost nuzzled his hand as if to say crowns want you. Samwell Tarly surfaced from the tunnel at noon. Snow clung to his cloak in thick drifts, so when he burst into the yard he resembled a waddling, half-melted snowman. Brothers cheered. He and a dozen stewards carried crates of dragonglass too heavy for one trek, plus bundles of crossbow bolts newly fletched. Behind Sam came Maester Aemon borne on a litter, eyes milky yet smile radiant. Even at 99 the old Maester felt the dawn through skin. Jon descended to greet them. Sam puffed, cheeks rosy under a crust of rime. We sealed the southern tunnel behind us with barrels of stone, just like you said, he reported. Nothing's following. Good, Jon said. Rest, then start cataloging glass. We'll need to arm every man before nightfall. Aye.
Sam hesitated.
Jon, did we truly end it? Jon followed his gaze to the breach. Snow still tumbled through, but quietly now.
No.
We won a reprieve. That is all wars give. Sam nodded, as if expecting no comfort larger. He drifted off to join the other stewards unloading. John helped Eamon from the litter. The maester's breath fogged in thin plumes. His hands trembled, but grip remained sure on John's arm. "I felt cold last night that put old age to shame," he murmured. "Yet here the sun returns. Stubborn thing. Stubborn things run in the family," John said, and Eamon laughed hoarsely. "Keep memory of that when winter howls again." John guided him to a chair near the new brazier. The old man's cataract eyes turned toward the warmth. "Your voice carries differently now, Jon Snow," he observed. "There is steel under sorrow." John swallowed. The ring weighed heavy in his pocket. Before he could answer, horns blared from Southgate. 2 blasts. Not danger, arrival. A column of riders approached, banners snapping. A giant white direwolf on gray field mottled with frost marks. John's heart stuttered. Over the crest of the King's Road came a tall figure garbed in layered furs and dyed green wool. Lady Lyanna Mormont of Bear Island, seat firmly in saddle, eyes fierce as new-honed spears. At her flank rode 30-odd islanders, axes across their backs. Behind them slogged 3 wagons laden with crates bound in seal leather. John hurried to the gatehouse as the portcullis lifted. Lyanna swung down before the hooves stilled, boots crunching frost. She scanned carnage without a flicker of fear. "You took your time," she declared by way of greeting. "I did not know I was waited on." John bowed shallow. She waved it aside. "Mormont scouts saw blue fires 2 nights ago. If the dead walked, we would not sit idle on Bear Island." She jerked a thumb. "Grain, dried cod, black oak spears tipped with obsidian, we napped ourselves. Also casks of fermented bear blood. My uncle claims it grants courage. Courage we have, but bear blood I won't refuse." John smiled despite exhaustion. "Thank you." Lyanna eyed the breach. "You must seal that hole. Drag it with iron chains. Melt edges to fuse." "We will. Every islander who can work rope is welcome." Before she answered, a sharp shiver shook the girl. Her eyes widened. A vision or simply wind? Her voice dropped. "We stood at the edge last night. I felt them in dreams. Wolves stalked by winter-horned elk, black tide under ice. You killed their master, but another waits. War is bigger than one night." John's blood cooled. "Then we fight again." Lyanna offered her small, hard hand. He clasped it, her grip belied size. "My men need beds," she said. John beckoned stewards to guide them, and work resumed. Afternoon waned beneath low gray sky. The breach took new shape. A timber lattice anchored by ice nails, cross-braced with iron rods scavenged from Stannis' shattered siege equipment. Brothers coated beams with slush and salt, then burned coals beneath until meltwater trickled and refroze, welding wood to ice. It was crude, but by dusk wind no longer hissed through open emptiness. Only a narrow crawlspace remained for masons come spring. John labored among them, hauling beams with Ghost padding silent at heel. The great direwolf unnerved some Baratheon men until John set him at the breach's base to scent for any stirring dead. Ghost sniffed once, then settled, head on paws, vigilant. Stannis oversaw later stages, sleeves rolled, hair stiff with frost. When knots jammed, he lent his knife. When a pulley rope snapped, he cursed and retied it himself. Men worked harder beneath such example. Melisandre stood beyond torch glow, eyes like twin rubies absorbing toil. At last, as purple bruised the horizon, John ordered fires lit along the ramparts. Sam circulated with pitchers of thick pepper broth ladled into chipped mugs. Steam rose in fragrant curls. John accepted one, savoring heat. Ed joined him, jaw splinted, torpor in every step. "Snow tastes better boiled with pepper," he mumbled. John raised mug. "To pepper, and to snow we didn't drown under." Ed clanked his cup, then gazed at the breach. "Do you think when the rest come they'll knock first? We'll leave a bell." Ghost's ears pricked, the first note of humor that night. Night settled, clear and brittle. Stars burned like nails hammered through black velvet. John stood alone on the parapet, ring of smoky quartz turning in his gloved palm. Inside, watchfires ringed castle black, flickers of orange against whiteness. Every third tower hosted an arbalest loaded with a dragonglass coral. Forsworn brothers paced each wall section, yet quiet blanketed all. He slipped the ring onto a leather cord and looped it around his neck, beneath tunic. Promises could wait where hearts stayed close. For now, he belonged to shadow and snow. Boots scuffed behind. Sam leaned against the Merlin, cheeks ruddy from climbing. "I finished the tally," he announced, breath pluming. "Dragonglass enough for 2 arrows per man. Maybe 3 if we melt some crude pieces and cast smaller heads." "Not enough," John murmured. "I know." Sam's hand fidgeted with his belt. "But there's more buried on Dragonstone. Stannis could ferry it. Stannis will want payment."
Sam shrugged.
"What's life worth?" They fell into silence. Wind carried faint boom of distant ice cracking on the lake beneath the wall. After a while, Sam said, "I wrote Gilly." He avoided John's eye. "Told her south is no safer than north now, but that I saw dawn again." His voice quivered with unshed tears. John placed a hand on his shoulder. "A good letter."
Sam nodded fiercely.
"I will get her here, summer or winter. She deserves to know dawn as well." John's heart stung with memory of Ygritte. Amber hair, laugh like spilled water. He swallowed. "Dawn is not the end. It's the promise we hold until night comes again." Sam pressed gloved fists against stinging eyes. "Then we hold it." Below, the pyres crackled. Orange sparks soared into the black, vanishing among constellations. For each spark a name, for each name a vow renewed. John gripped the parapet, feeling the world turn cold and vast beneath his boots, yet no longer hopeless. The North had woken to war, but hearts still beat, fires still burned. He lifted his gaze to the distant peaks of the true North, where legends walked among frozen spires. Somewhere beyond those mountains, another dark king might gather strength, but tonight silence reigned. Between stars, he thought he saw movement. Icy plumes swirling, shapes like antlered giants wading through Aurori. He could not know whether it was imagination or omen, yet he did not look away. Ghost rose from where he'd been crouched, padded to John's side, and leaned his massive head against John's hip. Together, man and wolf watched the horizon until the first pale shimmer of dawn brushed the undersides of clouds. 3 days later, snow-laden ravens arrived from White Harbor, answering Stannis' call with curt pledges of grain convoys by sea. Baratheon captains cheered, though Horp muttered that Manderley would weigh payment in gold come spring. John cared little for springtime debts. Cellars would fill before the next storm, and that sufficed. Work on the breach continued. Beams were now double-braced. Islander carpenters fitted bare oak panels along the breach's face, shaving each board to nest in natural fissures. Ropes hauled blocks of ice cut from the lake, heaving them into gaps that men smoothed with heated irons, then drenched so water froze the seams. The barrier grew thicker daily. John bled fingers and shoulders among them, chopping ice with pickaxe, hauling stones in baskets. At night, he collapsed onto straw pallets in the Lord Commander's loft, too weary to remove boots. Dreams came restless. Wolves lost in white labyrinths, swords burning green, antlered shadows rising beyond the trees. He woke choking on cold, Ghost's muzzle pressed to his cheek, then dragged himself downstairs before First Horn to patrol. On the 4th dawn, Lady Lyanna convened a makeshift council in the old mess hall. John stood before scribbled maps of the Gifts villages, explaining plan to resettle willing wildlings in abandoned crofts south of the wall. Stannis grimaced, but supplies were scarce. If free folk tilled land, they might feed armies come harvest. Captains barked protest. Lyanna stared them down until their voices cracked like thin ice. "Better wildlings turned farmers than corpses storming our gate," she argued. "Feed hunger and you feed loyalty." John saw sparks of Old Bear Island wisdom in her words and backed them. In the end, Stannis relented. An initial settlement allowed under joint Watchmormont oversight. Tormund Giantsbane, revived with stitches along skull, agreed to lead volunteers. The giant laughed, slapping John's back so hard bruises renewed. "I always wanted a turnip patch," he boomed. Maybe grow one as big as Mansa's pride, that Afterno. On John walked the camp edge where wildlings queued beside black brothers to receive soup. A toddler in rabbit fur boots toddled from the line and seized John's cloak hem, tugging curiously. Her mother gasped, expecting reprisal, but John crouched and produced a wooden wolf he'd carved nights previous. The child squealed delight, biting the muzzle. Her mother's eyes dampened. Humanity reclaimed an inch. Near sundown, a horn on Eastwatch's distant tower pealed thrice in rapid succession, though nearly 50 leagues away. Rumors caught wind. A fleet inbound from across the narrow sea, sails blue as night. Pirates? Relief from bravos? None knew. Stannis sent riders east along the wall to learn, but days would pass before word returned. John sharpened dragonglass arrowheads by torchlight that night, mind circling possibilities. He remembered tales from Ygritte of a frozen Asker sea where dead whales sang children's names. If the others possessed ships of ice, Eastwatch could fall before dawn. His palm throbbed where wildfire scars still wept. He bound fresh linen over the blistered flesh and forced fear down. Melisandre entered unbidden, carrying no lamp, yet red glow bathed her like a second sunrise. She regarded arrowheads glittering on the bench. "I dreamed the sea drank fire," she spoke. John did not glance up. "Your dreams rarely match the waking world. You changed the waking world to match a dream," she countered, fingertip tracing scar tissue on his palm. He pulled back. She smiled faintly. "The prophets of old said kings of snow and ash would vie beneath bleeding stars. I stood upon the wall last night and saw crimson aurora flicker northward, as though sky bled from hidden wound. The war is not over. Your enemy now sails the shivering sea. Then let him sail. We defend here." Her eyes narrowed. "You cannot defend everything. Choose where to stand. I stand where men need the shield. Then I will stand beside." She turned toward the doorway, leaving soft echo behind. "Remember the fire, Jon Snow. It loves you." The torches guttered as if her passing sucked oxygen. Jon shivered despite heat. 7 days after the breach, white ravens flew from the citadel, landing one by one on turrets blackened by smoke. Jon knew their meaning before the rookery bell tolled. The conclave had declared winter officially come. Men paused, staring at the sky as though snowfall might intensify by decree. Some laughed bitter, others crossed themselves. Jon simply tightened his cloak and fetched a spade to shovel drifts from the east stair. Later that morning, a thunder of hooves stirred the courtyard anew. Riders clad in thick scarlet cloaks galloped through the southern gate. Queen's men, banners bearing a bleeding heart. At their head rode Queen Celis Baratheon, face grave, cheeks raw and cold. Shireen clutched her mother's waist, grayscale cheeks ruddy. Behind them rumbled supply wagons bearing carved suns at the top, sigil of House Florent. Jon greeted them at stair foot. Shireen's eyes brightened seeing Ghost. She slid off saddle and ran to bury hands in white fur. The dire wolf endured as though carved of marble. Jon bowed to Celis. "My husband squanders valiant blood," she announced at once, voice thin. "Yet I bring what succor I may." We stopped at Queen's Crown and collected grain from huddled shepherds. Her gaze traveled the breach, lip curling. "My daughter will remain in the tower where it's warm." Jon thanked her, then guided supply wagons toward storage sheds. Shireen walked beside, prattling to Ghost about a book on dragons she'd been reading. Jon caught glimpses of melancholy in her words. Viserion's corpse lay still beyond the breach, a frozen mountain beneath tarps. Maesters debated whether to hack scales for steel or drag corpse into the gorge. Each suggestion felt sacrilege. As dusk reddened the snowfield, Jon and Sam climbed the wall's repaired slope, pausing atop the new barrier to watch ravens swirl against crimson sky. Sam reported Eastwatch's messenger had reached Castle Black by Raven. The fleet bore banners of the Ironborn, House Harlaw, yet claimed truce, bringing supplies in exchange for safe anchorage. Stannis' captains debated allowing Ironborn within striking range. Jon scoffed. The world turned upside down if krakens carried grain.
Some gazed northward.
White blankness stretched until swallowed by twilight. "Sometimes I imagine the world has an edge," he murmured. "That armies will march to it and simply fall. Let's hope the dead reach it first," John answered. They lingered in silence until stars ignited overhead. A hush deeper than cold ensconced them. Breath sounded loud as waterfalls. From far below came faint twang of a bowstring, archers on night shift testing tautness. The wall itself hummed occasionally, as wind tunneled through new cracks.
Some shivered.
"We should add more torches," John agreed. They descended. That night John dreamed he walked through Winterfell's Godswood. Snow fell but melted upon red leaves before touching ground. The heart tree's face wept sap like dark tears. Ned Stark stood beneath, back turned. John reached, but his father turned to mist. In the dream he fell to knees, burying hands in the pool, which rippled with starlight and blood. Out of reflection rose a wolf with wings of ice, eyes burning sapphire. It devoured its own tail until nothing remained but grinding teeth. He woke gasping, clutching Longclaw. Ghost lay at foot of bunk, growling low. Wind slammed shutters. Moonlight sliced the loft. John rose, tugged cloak over shoulders, and slipped outside to breathe away terror. Courtyard fires burned low. Silhouettes of sentries moved along ramparts. Between towers, frost coated everything in crystalline sheaths that shimmered under moon. John paced until sweat chilled on skin. When he returned to bunk, he found the quartz ring warm against chest, though room held only cold. 10 days after the breach, men spotted columns on the western horizon. Mottled gray shapes slogging south, too orderly for wild beast herds. Scouts rode out. They returned near dusk reporting Bolton riders escorting supply wagons. Tribute for Stannis, rumor said, though at sword point, not from goodwill. John's heart clenched. Bolton banners near the wall meant flayed foes followed. Stannis assembled his captains in the yard as torches flared. He ordered drawbridge kept raised until emissaries parleyed. John watched from parapet, ghost pressed against leg. When Bolton riders neared, their white flayed man on pink field fluttered above cruel spiked helms. The envoy's armor gleamed red-brown even in low light, dry blood not yet scrubbed. He hailed the wall with mocking courtesy, voice carrying on still air. "I bear gifts from Lord Roose Bolton, Warden of the North, to his rightful king." He indicated wagons full of grain, smoked lamb, oatcakes. But Lord Bolton insists on courtesy equal. Release of his bastard son Ramsay, taken by wildlings on your watch. Murmurs stirred. None had seen Ramsay near Castle Black. John eyed Tormund, who shrugged. He'd capture 1,000 men before that bastard passed his fire. Stannis's glare could melt steel. "I hold no Ramsay," the envoy smiled thin. "Then perhaps the free folk do, and perhaps you hold free folk." He looked up at John. "Or perhaps Lord Bolton sends his greetings regardless, so your wall may stand until his armies march to relieve you properly." John's palms tingled. Ghost snarled. The envoy's bravado masked something. John scanned wagons, each packed high, yet shadows pooled unnaturally beneath tarps. He whispered to a sergeant. "Arrow knocked, but do not fire unless signal." Stannis negotiated stiff politeness while islanders began offloading sacks. John's eyes never left wagons. From vantage he glimpsed black iron bars hidden beneath canvas cages. Within, vague shapes twitched. Unease twisted. He descended rampart. Approaching wagons, he pried tarp corner. Cold breath hissed. Inside crouched children. Wildling, northern, ragged, eyes bruised purple, wrists bound, mouths gagged. At sight of him, they whimpered. John's heart lurched. He tore gag from the nearest, a girl with hair the hue of autumn wheat. "He said if we screamed we'd be fed to dogs," she sobbed. John strode to envoy, voice blade thin. "You traffic children." The man shrugged. "Wards against treachery. Bolton loyalty is staple of the North." John's rage boiled. At his gesture archers raised bows. The envoy's smile faltered. "These children stay," John declared. "The grain stays too. You ride south with Bolton's apologies." Stannis eyed him, calculating. Bolton wagons meant food for months, yet honor demanded refusal. He exhaled. So be it. Escort them to the King's Road and strip them of arms. The envoy sputtered, hand drifting to sword. Ghost's snarl silenced him. Guards disarmed riders, marched them out at spear point. Jon oversaw a release of prisoners. Many hugged stewards, weeping. That night he and Stannis argued beneath stone arches. The realm cannot afford scruples, Stannis growled. The realm survives on scruples, Jon fired back. Children mean futures. Feed them and they'll stand in your host willingly when grown. Stannis's jaw worked. You make me choose between honor and victory. I make you see victory born of honor. They parted uneasy. Yet next dawn Stannis met Jon in yard, and together they rationed Bolton grain to both free folk and watch, under banners newly sewn. A white direwolf beside a crowned stag, stitched by Shireen's small hands. As January's first moon climbed, something changed in the night sky. Aurora, once pale, now burned red as gaping wounds, bleeding across stars. Ravens from Eastwatch spoke of sea freezing solid in single night, black water turning glass under ships' keels. Fishermen found Leviathan carcasses ashore, eyes crystallized, tongues gone. The iron-born fleet sailed away when nets drew up only shards of ice shaped like fish. Sam's voice quivered reading the letter. Jon felt dread return. On the 12th day of the moon, a great boom shook Castle Black at dusk, ice fissuring under Wall's eastern flanks. Rangers reported a black glacier rumbling toward the shore, creeping south like a monstrous slug, freezing sea as it moved. Upon its crest marched pale figures wielding standards shaped like ice antlers. Jon donned cloak and descended to yard where men gathered. Stannis ordered horns blown, every man to walls. Lyanna Mormont mounted a parapet with axe gleaming. Ghost howled, song vibrating stone. Jon looked north. Beyond, the repaired breach shadows stirred under red aurora, coalescing into host uncounted. At their head towered a figure 2 men tall, crowned with branching horns of hoarfrost, cloak billowing like midnight storm cloud. Blue fire danced along antlers, reflected in the glacier behind. Jon gripped Longclaw. The War of Dawn had only been prelude. He scanned men at his side. Ed with jaw wired shut, Sam clutching dragonglass, Tormund brandishing turnipwood spear, Godry balanced on his new oak peg. They were battered, sleepless, ragged, yet eyes met his with unbroken flame. He raised sword. Torches flared along the wall, each a star in gathering night. Drums tapped heartbeat rhythm. Bows creaked. Wind carried the hush before first snowfall. Night gathers, Jon said, voice steady. And now my watch begins. They answered, thousands of throats in unison. The horn sounded once, twice, thrice, bold, defiant. From the glacier came echo like thunder of splintering worlds. Snow surged forward, glazed with blue. Jon stepped to the parapet's edge, ghost at heel, and faced the advancing winter. Around his neck the quartz ring warmed as though lit from within, matching heartbeat. Behind him fires blazed. Not merely flames, but the stubborn heat of living hearts. The longest night had come again, and again men stood,